Next, we have a fireside chat, decarbonization road mapping, the why, what, and how. Drew Higgins, Ryan Macaluso, and Jerry Price.
Everybody hear me? Perfect. Coming up after lunch is always a great spot to be in. So with that, I want you to know that we're going to entertain you a little bit. This is a great topic, and we only have 30 minutes, so we're going to be swift about it. I'm going to turn it over to these gentlemen. This panel will explore the intricacies of decarbonization within the context of our current market dynamics, legislative frameworks, and technology. Our speakers, Ryan and Jerry, will draw from their extensive experience to provide insights into the decarbonization roadmap, focusing on practical strategies, policies, and innovation. So we're going to cover 3 topics in particular: decarbonization landscape, impact of the IRA, and market viability. And what I want everyone in here to know is these 2 experts are going to take up the entire time. But if you have a burning question, hopefully we might be able to get to it at the end, but maybe not. But that doesn't stop you from trying to interrupt us, so go ahead. All right, with that, gentlemen, I'll turn it over to you. Well, the first question, right? Decarbonization landscape. And Jerry?
Yeah, so, you know, the world obviously is changing. We've been talking about this pretty earnestly for the past few years. I think people are starting to look in detail now at how do you do this? How do you decarbonize operating facilities? Ryan will talk a little bit about his company and what they're looking at. But, you know, refining companies, petrochemical companies, upstream, midstream companies, everybody in the downstream energy ecosystem is looking at some form of decarbonization. It doesn't mean we're trying to turn off these assets. We're trying to make them cleaner and better. So I think that's an important piece of it. The IRA is unlocking some ability to do that. There's some challenges associated with that. We'll talk about it in a little bit, but I think that's kind of my view. It's time to start thinking seriously about what are the investments that need to be made now, and what can be delayed, and what can be invested in the next 10 to 15 years.
Yeah, so I'll give a little bit of context on that. So I work for a company called Motiva. We operate the largest refinery in North America, 650,000 barrels a day in Port Arthur, Texas, owned by Aramco. And so our goals as a company, we have, so I manage all the sustainability strategy and business development for that company. So we have new energies ambitions in that space. We're looking at things, you've heard across the panels today, there's kind of low carbon hydrogen and ammonia, renewable diesel and sustainable aviation fuel. We're looking at trying to reduce scope 3 emissions by looking at sourcing in circular plastics, kind of plastic waste as feedstocks. Kind of looking throughout the chain at new and emerging technologies to try to help reduce our carbon footprint and make our business fit for future. But in that, kind of we operate a refinery today, and we make petroleum-based fuels. And in order to make sure that we are viable over the long term, making sure that we do so as efficiently as possible with as few emissions as possible is pretty key to our success. And so this is where Jerry was getting after in terms of looking at decarbonization roadmaps. So we've got a really big, complex, interesting facility that's been around since the early 1900s. So we've got a lot of work to do to decarbonize a patchwork quilt of a facility that's been built over the past 100 years.
So with that, staying on decarbonization landscape, how does what you do, both of you, and I'll give you both a chance to answer this, affect the average everyday person in this room now and 10 years from now?
Well, there's no free lunch, right?
Okay.
So everything has to be paid for somewhere. Either that's tax money, whether it's people paying higher prices for energy. The reality is somebody's footing the bill. And so you look at people, Motiva is a good example, someone that operates a highly efficient, clean, highly complicated asset. Can they make fuels cheaper than their competitors? That's the name of the game. But the third axis now is you have to do it not only cheaper than your competitors, but also cleaner. So it's becoming a new demand, I would say, from people in the audience and people around the world of, I want cleaner products, I want them to be sustainable. Can you deliver them to me at the same cost or similar cost? That's the challenge.
So the first part is you're all going to be paying more money. So we got that.
Somebody.
Super popular panel. A little bit more context around that. last week at CERAWeek, my company's CEO, Aramco's CEO, Amin Nasser, spoke. And the three pillars of kind of his transportation fuel strategy and his strategy for Aramco overall are affordability, security, and sustainability, okay? That is a three-legged stool. Without one of those three legs, you don't have a stable transportation fuel environment, okay? So look back at Europe in 2022 is a great example, right? So a region that decided to move quickly towards sustainability had over-leveraged on Russian LNG, and a lack of security of supply drove energy shortfalls in that region for a substantial period of time. So in our framework, again, as part of kind of what Motiva's driving force is here, is to try to make transportation fuels with those three characteristics in mind: affordability, security, and sustainability. Now, in the sustainability space, okay, so decarbonization has been something that has become a hotter topic over the past couple of years. So I started in this role a year and a half ago, and we've been developing our sustainability roadmap over that intervening period of time. So I look at my facility, okay? So Port Arthur, Texas, again, kind of really big refinery. If I look at the square footage of that site, it is 4 UT campuses, kind of stretched end to end, okay? Imagine trying to do something like carbon capture or hydrogen as a fuel, where you're stretching literally a mile across the facility to go from one side to another in order to make these solutions work. So I'm super excited about it because it's a super interesting problem statement about how do you take this facility. Again, we are one of the most complex, have the best ability to process distressed, high contaminant crudes in the world. But at the same time, with that ability to process complex crudes, in a typical refining environment that may be different than some other manufacturing facilities, you need a lot of heat. Process heat is the key that drives these facilities. And it's really difficult to get heat in an efficient way that doesn't require the burning of some kind of fuel or another, okay? So I think one of the things that Jerry and I have been working on over the past few months is to try to say, hey, in my facility, if you're going to go decarbonize, help understand what are those ways in which you can decarbonize. So there's a couple of ways you can go about that, okay? So first is just around energy efficiency, okay? So I've got some assets that have been there since the 50s and 60s. My dad has a 1960s Mustang, and it is, with original equipment, a pretty crappy car. We've done a lot of upgrading over time, but at the same time, there are inefficiencies in that old of equipment that are going to be difficult to overcome, right? So finding new ways to recapture heat sources, do preheating kind of before you go into a process to make that a more efficient asset is easily kind of the first and foremost thing that you want to do in a facility like that. It helps save energy, but it makes you money at the same time, right? Assuming that you have a 100% efficient facility, then the next step after that is starting to figure out, how do I go abate carbon in that type of environment? And that's where some of the analysis that Green Star's helped us with has been really pivotal. Maybe talk about that a little bit, Jerry.
Sure, we can do that. And before I do that, one thing we need to make clear is decarbonized energy is almost always more expensive than the energy forms that we enjoy today. I mean, that's the reality of it. We use the cheapest energy sources we can today because they're the cheapest. That's what drove us to where we are today. So to transition out of that, there is a cost. We have to figure out what that is. We have to minimize that additional cost. But I'll take an example of something like hydrogen firing, right? I hear a lot about people saying, well, yes, you need a lot of high temperature heat. Let's fire hydrogen to get it. Okay, where did the hydrogen come from? You need about 30% more energy to make the same amount of energy in a hydrogen molecule. So the energy transition actually is going to require more energy than we use today. And I don't think everybody appreciates that, maybe people in the room do, but there's a general conception that we can switch energy sources at the same amount of energy consumption. That's not the case. It's gonna be much, much higher than we have today. So you've got that on top of switching demand choices. It's a very complicated problem to solve. The costs are substantial. I mean, let's lay it out there. The costs are substantial. If the costs were minimal, this would already have been done. We would have done this already. So we have one slide, I think we're gonna talk about this a little bit, is how do we think about cost of abatement? Because one thing we try to do when we're looking at a decarbonization roadmap is we try to minimize that cost of abatement. That's almost the key variable. When we say cost of abatement, we're talking about eliminating CO2 emissions at an expense of either capital, operating, or some combination thereof. Do we have one slide we can kind of show? Oh, you have it, perfect. Yeah, so I'm not sure if everybody can read that, but the way we look at it is we look at it in segments. There are pieces of decarbonization. So there's costs for disposing of CO2. There's costs for capital. There's costs for variable OpEx. There's costs for people to run the plant, fixed costs. You've got maintenance over the life cycle. There's a lot of costs that go into this. The incentive bar on the far right, the second from the right, isn't quite big enough. It's getting there. It's just not there yet. And so I think it's challenging to make the math work today. There has to be additional incentives or some sort of other impetus to make this happen, right? And I think that bluish colored bar is what's holding us back.
Yeah, so I'll elaborate a little bit. So this particular slide is all about kind of putting in a post-combustion carbon capture unit within Motiva's facility. And that blue bar is a 45Q credit, okay? So what I'm seeing in that bar, and again, what the goal of this is what's gonna come out of this, that number is a cost of carbon abatement. This helps me as an operator to generate a marginal abatement cost curve that helps me identify investments within a facility that I can do to get to, Aramco has an ambition for net zero footprint of scope 1 and scope 2 emissions by 2050, okay? So by that point, I've got to have investments laid out and a framework laid out to say, how do I get to that 2050 benchmark on time? This is the way that I do that for one investment, okay? So for one investment, I build up all of those costs, I debit the value of the 45Q that comes from that, and I get an overall cost of carbon abatement on a dollar per ton of CO2 abated basis, okay? What that says is I've got a bunch of cost on an ongoing basis that I'm gonna have to burden as a facility if I'm gonna go capture carbon, even after factoring in the 45Qs, okay? Part of the problem with this, okay, so let's talk through kind of some of the deep decarbonization levers. So Jerry already talked through hydrogen firing. There's post-combustion carbon capture. You can also electrify furnaces, use electric heat where you can. Okay, so let's talk through each of those and go through the pros and cons of each approach. Carbon capture in a facility is tough. The problem with carbon capture is if I'm going post-combustion, the typical concentrations of CO2 that I see in that stream are like 3 or 4 volume percent, okay? So I'm taking all the flue gas that comes off of one of these units and I'm shoving it through a carbon capture process, and 1 out of every 20 molecules is my target, okay? So the size of the equipment necessary is just massive, right? So for world scale carbon capture unit, I've got an amine absorber that's part of that process. The size of a unit like that is literally the largest size of equipment I can pre-manufacture. It is 50 feet wide by 350 feet tall of a column full of amine, okay? It's $1 billion+ investment. And that gets me maybe 1/6 of the way of where I need to go through my facility, right? So that's a difficult one, okay? Hydrogen firing is interesting because in the hydrogen production process, what I'm doing so blue hydrogen, I've heard all these panels up here. I hate colors, and but it's useful. Blue hydrogen, so the production of hydrogen via kind of traditional methods, but capturing the carbon off of it. That production process actually creates a very concentrated CO2 stream. I've got to do really little work to that CO2 stream to be able to purify it enough and prep it enough to get it ready for carbon capture, okay? The problem is like 90% of the facility before that is also billions of dollars worth of investment to make that hydrogen. Even with carbon unabated today, I don't burn hydrogen at the facility. Why? Because you use methane to make hydrogen. Hydrogen is higher cost than methane is today. So again, I want to contextualize what the purpose of the IRA is for. The purpose of the IRA isn't to help facilities like me decarbonize. The purpose of the IRA is to drive costs down for these production routes such that they're at parity with existing production routes today. So in the case of hydrogen, things like 45Vs are out there to get green hydrogen at parity with where I see gray hydrogen, kind of normal hydrogen production processes today. So I, as a refiner, am incentivized to swap one versus the other, okay? I think electrification of furnaces was the last thing that we covered. I think there's some novel and interesting technologies here. Imagine that you've got like a Jenga tower where each of those little Jenga blocks is a little toaster. And so I'm just passing air through each of these Jenga blocks and it's heating up as it goes. It's not terribly efficient today, and it's not ready for commercialization today. So new and emerging technology to keep your eye out on, but again, not ready for prime time. So all of that to say, interesting kind of decarbonization routes, all of them cost money, and all of them are going to be burdens on the business on a go-forward basis.
So keeping on that target of like market viability, right? The current market's capacity to support these efforts, what is your kind of estimation of when or if it will become viable?
So let's talk through kind of where is the energy transition and where are energy transition investments succeeding today, okay? Sustainable aviation fuel is a great example, okay? Why is sustainable aviation fuel such a target for decarbonization? One, it is a good mechanism by which there's not really a great alternative, and I've got demand side pull. Okay, so there's conversation about airlines are going to have difficulty paying for SAF, but ultimately in Europe, I've got a demand pull in the form of RED 2 and RED 3 that are articulating a certain amount of SAF and eSAF needs to get into the overall pool for aviation fuel by a certain date, okay? That mandate requires that those airlines go blend that fuel away, and that creates your demand sink there. In the case of LCFS markets are another great example. So the low carbon fuel standard that's been established in California provides premiums for every carbon intensity point below a certain threshold that you can get with your fuel. So things like renewable diesel and sustainable aviation fuel found markets there where there's a customer willingness to pay for that decarbonization as it goes forward, okay? As much as I would like it, there's no separate pump at the gas station for a low CI gasoline right now, and there's no separate pump for a low CI diesel, right? So it is mandated by the government, and that is what is going to drive a lot of these things forward. So what you're asking, kind of what is going to incentivize that decarbonization via industrial users? Okay, so I think of refining, I think of steel, I think of cement, I think of other kind of venues like that. There's a seed kind of starting point of customers that have that willingness to pay. So imagine a steel consumer who is trying to go into a niche application for green buildings or green vehicles. They can reduce their carbon footprint that way. LCFS markets are an example of that. They're niche markets that I can place molecules into to go into. Outside of that, you're going to run into a demand limitation where there's not a customer willingness to pay at a certain threshold. That's the point where government mandates come in. That's the point that bridges that gap to say, once I am, as a producer, required to hit those benchmarks, I'll onboard those costs. Those costs will get passed on to the consumer. The goal of the IRA today is to drive down those costs as much as is possible to make sure that any cost inference or implication on the end consumer is as low as is possible when it does happen.
I think the IRA credits, I think I'm trying to read their minds of the Congress, what they've done, but what they've done is they've set 45Q at a certain number, and that didn't really move the needle. And then they put it at a little bit higher number, and that's sort of moving the needle now. My view is that they're kind of titrating it to the point where all the investment comes at once. So they're trying to find that equilibrium point. They don't want to set it too high because then they're just giving away taxpayer money. They want to get it to where it needs to be to spur the investment and then stop. So it's a delicate game that they're trying to play. It's obviously it's a complicated market, right? So they're trying to titrate it to the point where it makes sense. You make the investments, and then you got the infrastructure that you need to move forward with the energy transition. So you don't want to overpay, but you want to make it where it's like you said, close that gap between the willingness to pay and the cost of production.
But again, it's not like the IRA is not a permanent solution either.
True.
Right? So you look back at that chart that we had up there, right? And the 45Q helps to bring that carbon capture kind of cost on the manufacturer or consumer closer to break even. 45Qs are only there for 12 years, right? So if I think through, if I had that asset in today and I was manufacturing and capturing that carbon, sequestering it today, 12 years from now, that credit's not going to be there. And that cost is going to have to fall somewhere. So either I'm going to pass that on to the consumer, or I'm going to shut down that equipment because there's no customer willingness to pay for a lower CI product. Right?
Agreed.
Yeah, so the IEA, the International Energy Agency, has cited notable achievements: 55% growth in electric vehicles, 40% nuclear capacity additions, record year for things like heat pumps, electrolyzer capacity for hydrogen production saw significant growth. All these, and this is worldwide, all these are like, kind of pointed towards where we're going for a decarbonized future. And then there's other things like California basically running 2,400 gigawatts into the ground and basically their solar overcapacity. So when you look at this market, and this is for everyone in here looking at the future, what are the either policy or technology changes that you see in the next 10 years that are really that we want to be interested in? We want to tell the students about, like, whether it's what industry they want to go in or basically where they want to point. What do you want to direct to the audience? Like, this is where you need to be in 10 years.
Yeah. So I'm my burnt orange shirt here. I'm a UT chemical engineering grad from 2008. I finally made it back. And, a little victory lap here. I work for an oil and gas company. I work for the largest oil and gas company in the world, right? I think there are a number of different avenues that students at UT can go down, right? I think any one of the technology startups that are kind of popping up left and right, I think are great avenues by which to go scratch the itch of, hey, I want to help the world try to figure out energy solutions that are going to get them satisfaction out of what they're doing. I work for the oil and gas industry. My problem statement is trying to reduce emissions out of one of the biggest emitters in the world. And if that doesn't motivate you to get out of bed every morning, I don't know what does, right? I've got an amazing problem statement to try to figure out, look, if you factor in affordability and security alongside sustainability, petroleum-based transportation fuels are going to be around for a long time. Okay? How are we going to fix the problem of emissions in those petroleum-based transportation fuels if I'm not reinvesting into the assets that I have today to make them more efficient, to reduce the emissions that I have coming out of the asset today, in order to try to bridge that gap a little bit, right? So over the long term, I think you can have the debate about where demand curves for transportation fuels fit. Seeing EV adoption increase is a great method of reducing Scope 3 emissions kind of at the point source of the vehicle, and anxious to see further development in that space. That's not a catch-all solution across the world. You look at India, you look at South America, you look at developing nations in Africa, Southeast Asia. Transportation fuel demand is going to continue to be there, and figuring out ways to decarbonize the sector more broadly are important problem statements. So,
I think my view is the best thing we can do right now is be more efficient with the stuff that we're using.
yeah.
So you look at these unicorn startup valuations for things like Uber. What did Uber do? It took underutilized assets and it repurposed them to be more utilized. Are there fewer cars in existence today because of Uber? Absolutely. That's less stuff we had to make as a society. Airbnb, another good example. They're looking for inefficiencies in the market. It may not be directly in the market you're in, but they're looking for inefficiencies in the market, and they're targeting that. That's what the oil and gas industry needs to remain focused on, is eliminate inefficiencies as much as you can. Now, I don't think there's a Uber model for refineries, but what I'm saying is, if you've got underutilized assets, you got to figure out how to get those things working at high capacity. We've got to streamline the industry. That's really what has to happen. That will make the biggest dent in emissions in a short amount of time. That's what you can do right now.
Outstanding, outstanding. So I want to be conscious of time. We have 4 minutes left. I think we have time for one question, if anyone has a question. You can come up to the mic or you can yell at me, and I will be responsive. Okay, so if there's no questions, I think we did a good job. I will go ahead and say that. But I will close with a few final notes. First, I want to thank these gentlemen for bringing their expertise here. It's amazing to have professionals who are in this field doing the hard work and making changes, so I appreciate it. The future of our country, the state, is dependent upon the work you're doing. And so when you look across kind of the spectrum of energy, I've been in the utility sector for now 5 years, before that the transportation sector. What you're doing is critical to the changes we need. So the IRA's here. We don't know if that's going to be around in the future, but we know we're going to have to make a change. So we really, really appreciate your work.
Let me kind of make I feel like I've been suitably grouchy over the course of this. I feel like I should maybe take a step back and end with a more positive, optimistic note, right? Even seeing a company like Aramco over the past 2 years, kind of the Saudi national oil company, whose job it is to pump 10,000 barrels a day of crude night and day, come around to say hydrogen and ammonia are a huge part of our future. I'm working on sustainable fuels investments here locally, where renewable diesel and SAF are going to become more of a kind of go-forward investment in our portfolio. Things like the energy efficiency drives that we have out at our site, and the work that they're doing to try to make sure that we are making best use of the equipment and kit that we have is admirable, and I'm proud to work for a company like this. And on a go-forward basis, I think what the message that I want to leave the audience with is not one of kind of just despair. It's more to focus on the fact that it's the job of guys like Jerry and I in the industry to find ways to decarbonize. And what we've shown in kind of the chart that's up there in some of the work that we've done is the policy framework that's out there today is not fit for purpose. And so I think there's work to do on a go-forward basis on both the technology side to make sure that we're improving our technological kind of lower that cost barrier to these decarbonization levers. But at the same time, approach the energy industry with kind of policies in the future that are going to better stimulate demand for the industry to decarbonize. So,
Jerry, last words?
Oil and gas has been around for over 100 years. It's going to be around for another 100 years. We need smart people thinking about how to make it as efficient as possible in a clean manner. It's going to take a lot of people, a lot of brain power to do it. I think we're up for the challenge. So.
Love it. Outstanding. Thank you very much for your time.